Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're at. My name is Christian Devine Esquire, and welcome to Retro View, a safe zone for physical media. This is going to be a special edition of Retro View because we're going to be focusing on two elements, cultural elements, that I have not discussed yet on any of the episodes, but eventually I knew I would get to. One is, this is a film from the Criterion collection, and from one of my favorite filmmakers in the world, Mr. Stanley Kubrick. And of course I'm talking about Criterion's new release in 4K of Stanley Kubrick's 1975 epic semi-tragi-comedy, Barry Lyndon.
As an 18th century rake's progress, Barry Lyndon catalogues the rise and fall of a likable scoundrel, liar, cheat, and social climber, transporting the viewer into a world of long ago and creating the kind of magic few movies accomplish and few directors attempt in a lifetime. Barry Lyndon, a film by Stanley Kubrick based on the novel by William Makepeace Thackeray, starring Ryan O'Neal and Marissa Berenson.
Now, Barry Lyndon recently came out, I should say recently meaning 2017, it's hard to believe it's been that long, on Criterion. And now this is a brand new 4K restored from the 35mm negative. And so we're going to discuss if this is worth the upgrade to you. And to me it certainly is, because Stanley Kubrick is certainly one of my favorite filmmakers in the world. And on certain days, 2001: A Space Odyssey is probably my favorite film of all time. And if aliens ever came to Earth and said, "We're going to destroy you, give us some proof, give us some evidence that you're worthy of continuing," one of the things that I would give them, cultural items I would give them, would be 2001: A Space Odyssey. And just for the sake of record, my top three Kubrick films are 2001: A Space Odyssey, Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, and now Barry Lyndon. It took me quite a long time to get to Barry Lyndon as a film, because growing up I'd heard about it, I knew it was a Kubrick film, but it almost never played on TV, rarely screened at repertory theaters. And I also had the idea that I really wanted to see it on the big screen. I knew that it was visually lush, so I really wanted to see it in the right format, and it took a long time before it was released, in any sort of video format. And definitely early on could, have used, major restorative improvement over the image. But once again, I never saw the film until, maybe 10 years ago. And my friend had a big projector screen at his place, and so we watched the DVD, and I fell in love immediately with the film. And growing up, as a media baby, I somewhat remember the release of the film. I remember the Time magazine cover. But my biggest exposure to Barry Lyndon, in a way I've known about the film, and unfortunately, knew a lot of the spoilers for the film because of Mad Magazine, which I was a big fan of and reader of as a kid, because Mad Magazine taught me pretty early on that to question everything in our media society and media culture. And Mad Magazine's parody was called BARRY Lyndon, because that was the big critical swipe against the film, that it was, very stately and slow. And of course that was the intent of the film in a lot of ways, but the criticisms were there and pretty brutal. And Mad Magazine's piece, even without having seen the film, it's a very hilarious parody, and you can easily find it online, I'm sure. And so that was kind of my exposure to Barry Lyndon. So when I saw it for the first time, I was really impressed by one thing. Is, yes, it is very, I would say, not slow, but deliberate, stately and deliberate, but it's also flat out hilarious in many scenes. The first half particularly, of course. It's very much a tragi-comedy, and I was surprised at how, satirical, much of it is. It's got a fantastic cast, and the one thing that surprised me the most is Ryan O'Neal. He's absolutely perfect for it. I'm not always convinced that Kubrick uses sometimes the best actors for leads. I particularly think of The Shining, which I have a very controversial take on, which is more in tune with the initial critical response of it than the over the years evaluations of it again, which is it is my least favorite Stanley Kubrick film. I think The Shining is his worst movie. Now, of course, any director whose worst movie is The Shining is leagues above most other people. So to say Stanley Kubrick's worst movie, you know, is probably some filmmaker's best movie. And I would throw in Eyes Wide Shut after that. But not to say they're not, you know, every Stanley Kubrick film is worth watching and probably rewatching. And, you know, you can always, these films sometimes require rewatching. I don't personally. I'm very attuned to the nature of film I'm watching. So when I watch a film for the first time, I have, like I said, a photographic memory. So I know pretty instantaneously my feelings on it. It's very rare that I will ever, like, recalibrate my feelings towards a film. I just know exactly what I think about a film when I first watch it for the first time. The only film that I was completely wrong on, and it required a hardcore second viewing, was Repo Man. But we can talk about that in another retro view. But I fell in love with Barry Lyndon immediately, and it immediately shot up to my top 3 Kubrick pantheon. But in this case, this Barry Lyndon is wonderfully cast, particularly Leonard Rossiter as the suitor to Barry's object of affection, his cousin that he has an affair with. And Rossiter is just brilliantly funny. And Andrea Morel, who once played Quatermass on TV as a kind of conduit to high society, is fantastic. And Leon Vitelli, who later became Kubrick's assistant after working on this as Barry Lyndon's, you know, stepson, he's quite brilliant in the film. And Marisa Berenson as the countess that Barry Lyndon seeks to marry solely for her status in life, because to Barry Lyndon's, you know, point of view, that's everything, status, rising up. He wants everything, but doesn't really want to earn it or know how to earn it. So yes, Barry Lyndon is a cad in every sense of the word, and never mind that my initials are CAD. He's a flawed character, of course, and not too admirable, though he does have moments of genuine kind of ethics and honesty, which makes a character a little more shaded than you might initially think. Of course, outside of the meticulous acting in the film, the most famous thing about Barry Lyndon is, of course, John Alcott's amazing cinematography and the lighting, which used existing candlelight in every scene, interior scene, for the first time in movie history. And they had to use, of course, you know, film fans all know that he had to use these special NASA adapted lenses to capture that level of lighting with, you know, just only candlelit illumination. And it's quite breathtaking. And this truly is one of the most visually stunning films ever made. Every shot literally could be a painting. And of course, they're modeled after masters like Hogarth and Gainsborough. So there's lots of shots that are duplicating the tone and composition and lighting of a lot of these famous paintings. And so the film is an epic. It does have an intermission, probably one of the last films to have an intermission, because this came out in '75, and that had been that was the kind of roadshow film was becoming kind of an outdated concept. So this is definitely one of the last few films to have an intermission of the '70s. And once again, I love these kind of epics, and it's an intimate epic in a way, although you travel quite a bit and follow Barry Lyndon on his misadventures. And like I said, the first half is really, truly funny, and then it gets a little more grim in the second half, even though the narrator, played by the wonderfully wry Michael Hordern, kind of tells you what's going to happen. You know things are not going to end well for Barry Lyndon Esquire. But obviously that's part of the, you know, satirical charm of the film. And once again, when the film came out, it was poorly reviewed and poorly attended. And, you know, the critics just didn't know what they had then. I mean, the fact that the critics slammed 2001 actually when it came out, and then despite that, the audiences discovered it. And, we're kind of spoiled in a way that we had Barry Lyndon and Stanley Kubrick, and the critics didn't really embrace it. I'm not sure that it ever would have been a big audience hit. I think an almost 3-hour film in the same year that Jaws came out was going to be a tough sell, and it certainly could have connected with audiences if the critics had been more willing to go with it. And Pauline Kael, who was always very critical of Kubrick and clearly didn't like his kind of cold, detached, manner to his films. And she's, jazz and he's classical. And so she said that Barry Lyndon is a masterpiece of insignificant details. And when you read her review, she's not totally wrong. You can see her point of view. I just think she's not connecting with the film on what the film's intent is, what it's offering. It's not supposed to be fast-paced. It is supposed to be a painting. It is supposed to capture that element of time and to make you feel how long time stretched out in that 18th century. And you're kind of, marinating in all these beautiful details. And once again, I will say Ryan O'Neal's performance is truly underrated. It's one of the great performances in any Kubrick film. And, he doesn't have the thickest Irish accent, but he's very sincere, and you just completely, to me, buy him as this character who's, kind of a cad. But there is some truly emotional scenes, and maybe one of the most emotional scenes ever done. I won't give no spoilers, but one of the most emotional scenes probably in any Kubrick film, and kind of surprising. It's something that any other filmmaker could have been very maudlin, very over sentimental, but Kubrick is not that, so it actually is more effective because it's a genuine expression of emotion, in a Kubrick film, which is not necessarily that common. So I think Ryan O'Neal is incredibly underrated in the film, and I'm glad that over the years this film has gone a major critical reevaluation, as many Kubrick films do. And I finally got to see it on the big screen when they re-released it around 2018, I think, and I saw it in London, which was fantastic. And so now let's go on to the actual disc. So Barry Lyndon was originally released in Criterion in 2017 in this version, a 2-disc Blu-ray set. And it had not a huge amount of extras, but quite a few new interviews and a making of, so quite enough to make it certainly worthwhile to have the extras on the disc, and I thought it looked fantastic. And so I've been very happy with having this version. And so sometimes, the question is, do you need a 4K upgrade of a Blu-ray? Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. It simply depends on what they're doing. And so now we have, in 2025, the same exact cover, which I quite love, by the way. I think this is a fantastic cover and a, beautiful poster design. And I'm not always a fan of new art for films on physical media because the purist in me always wants to have the original poster. Even if it's not a great poster, it's good to have, to me, the original artwork represented. And so this is a pretty beautiful, perfect cover, and I think defines the film brilliantly. And so the 4K is taken from a 35mm negative, and it's been overseen by Leon Vitelli, and obviously he passed away recently, so this new version was not overseen, but it was taken from a negative that was. There's a 5.1 sound mix and the original mono soundtrack. I always prefer the mono unless the director was involved, so because then you're getting the more, the purest vision of the film. And Kubrick was a purist in the sense of, an age where Kubrick would send out, memos to projectionists on how to exactly, project the film. And there was some controversy about Stanley, about the aspect ratios for some of Kubrick's films, particularly Barry Lyndon. And so, but we actually have his, letters that he sent to projectionists, asking them to, this to be framed in the 1/66 format. And so we know exactly how he wanted it presented. And so this is what we have here. And so is the 4K worth it? Now, I've done a side-by-side comparison, and there's not, I'm going to say, a staggering amount of difference. There's definitely some sharpness, some, more vibrancy to the color in the 4K. And so to me, it's worth it, and I love this film so much. Any excuse to get a new version with, that will exceed the other version, I will certainly go for. And so it's going to be up to you to decide if you, want the upgrade. I do think it is I don't think it's significant, but I think it is. But there's a couple caveats, and one caveat is that there is actually in one shot when Barry Lyndon is listening on these soldiers in a pond, debating whether he's going to steal their horse, there's actually a hair on the bottom of the frame. Now, this is not on the 2017 Blu-ray, but it is on the 2025 4K. So that begs the question, was this part of the original negative and they simply said we're going to leave it there as testament to Kubrick's vision, or was there simply poor quality control that day, which I would not believe. It's a very noticeable hair, and other reviews have commented on it. So it's a question I would like some answers to. Did they digitally erase it from the previous version, or were they not using, did the 35mm negative they used for the 2017 just not reveal that? It seems hard for me to believe that it would be a mistake that Criterion particularly would miss out on that. So that's something that you have to decide. Is that a negative or a positive? It makes the film feel like a film, though, certainly, when projected. And, it's not a huge deal to me, but I think it's an issue that should be kind of dealt with. And I'm going to assume that hair came from, that is something locked into the 35mm print, or they could have digitally erased it. So that's another debate that we can have at another time. My other caveat about this release is that there are no new extras whatsoever, to the point of when I actually was going to put the Blu-ray in on the 4K set. It's the 3-disc set, one 4K and the other two Blu-rays with the extras in the film on Blu-ray format. And I just wanted to look at the film on the Blu-ray format to compare it. And I popped it in, and it actually started from the point that I had left my previous Blu-ray of Barry Lyndon, which I always think is, clearly it's like it's a machine just hitting the encode, and it's going to play exactly the same thing. But I was kind of like, what magic is this? What's going on? So I had to take the disc out a couple times. Like, I've never played this. Why is it starting from the point where I left off of my Blu-ray? This is weird. But I realized the encoding is exactly the same on the Blu-rays. So I can tell you that there's no difference whatsoever in the Blu-rays. And there really should be a couple extra features on a 4K release if you're going to re-release it. At the very least, there totally should be an audio commentary. I would have loved to have done an audio commentary. Not that Criterion would have called me for that, but somebody out there could have certainly done a wonderful audio commentary. And so that's something that I really would have liked to have seen. Just a couple extra, features, so you're feeling like you're getting a few more tchotchkes on the release. Now, of course, the difference is the 2017 has got the plastic cover, which I actually prefer. There's a whole, subculture of concern about slip covers, etc., and I don't have that interest or concern, because to me a slip cover just means a little more extra space that's going to add up to a lot more space on my shelves. And my top shelf behind me, as you can see, actually is all Criterion at the top. And so the 2025 is a much thicker box, and it has a slide out, which I don't actually like more, because to me it's kind of a bit of a, just one more little layer of opening that I've got to get to the disc. But that is a first world problem if there ever was one. And so I would say, just in the interest of supporting Criterion in this release, you should probably get the 4K if you love the film like I do. There certainly is an upgrade in visual quality, not staggering, but just enough to make it worthwhile, I think. And we'll talk more about Criterion in a couple more episodes, but I wanted to briefly touch upon the difference between collecting and curating. And I've always considered myself a curator, meaning I don't buy things just to own them. I don't, whatever I buy, I want to utilize. And so every movie that I get, I plan on watching, again and again. And maybe it might take some time between viewings, but it's something that I want to have. I don't want just to buy stuff to have it, because otherwise I would have way more movies, and I've already got too many movies. So I consider what I'm interested in, very niche, and I want to have the best of everything in a way, which means I don't need to have everything. And so like I said, I consider myself a curator and not a collector. And so Criterion means standard, and Criterion used to be more kind of a cine elite source of films, and over the years they've embraced true diversity in global cinema. So now we have Bruce Lee films on Criterion and Godzilla films on Criterion, which is amazing, and it is as it should be. So I'm a big fan of Criterion, and sometimes their films aren't necessarily mastered to the best quality according to some of the experts online, so that's something that people will always be debating about. But I think in terms of this release of Barry Lyndon, which is my third favorite Stanley Kubrick film, and I think a masterpiece, I would highly recommend it. And thank you so much for retro viewing. Please like and subscribe. That lets me know that there's an audience of like-minded people out there. And we're going to come back with a lot more physical media releases and retro views. And thank you so much.